Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Our topic is zero waste at the municipal level, and our tutor is Jaka Kranjc, who is an expert from Ekologi Brez Meja, Ecologists Without Borders, an organization from Slovenia. And he's an expert responsible for preparing, for example, zero waste strategies and plans for local governments in Slovenia. And I think you will introduce yourself maybe more, Jaka. Thank you, and I will give the floor to Jaka. Thanks, and have a nice 2 hours or an hours and a half. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the invitation and for the word. We'll indeed have quite some time. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. Let me just set up screen sharing.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt now, Jaka? Sorry, because yes. I forgot to tell that we got an attendance list, and I will write down the link for attendance list here. Wait a minute. On the chat below on the right side. So please write down, everybody, please write down the name and the institution, because it's really needed, because our because of this this webinar is financed from the grant, so we have to show that you have been here. Okay, here is chat and there is an attendance list. Proszę o wypełnienie listy obecności. Wszystkich Państwa proszę o wpisanie też samorządu, z którego Państwo jesteście, imienia i nazwiska. Będę za to bardzo zobowiązany, żeby wszyscy tutaj wpisali swoje imię i nazwisko, no bo musimy się rozliczyć z tego projektu. Bardzo dziękuję, thank you, and sorry for interruption.
Okay, so like I said, please, if you have questions, do interrupt me. You can unmute yourself and speak up if the software allows that, or write in the chat. But you know, you will get more of the out of the session if you ask about things that you want to know, because I will talk about several different aspects: why municipalities join, what are some of the good practices that we have in Slovenia, what's the typical work that's being done across Europe. So it will be a whole array of different things, but if you have really specific desires, just ask, because we have the time. And yes, it's true, I come from Slovenia. This is a picture from our capital, and Slovenia is actually tiny. I mean, it's smaller than Wielkopolska, and we are quite lucky because we are nestled between the Alps and the Dinaric range, and then the Pannonic plain and the Mediterranean. So it's quite geographically diverse, topographically diverse, and it's a biodiversity hotspot. And that might help us a bit in our attitude toward nature, toward environmental conservation, and let's say our default levels of awareness. I come from these organizations that we just simplify and call EBM for short, because foreigners usually have trouble pronouncing it. But what we do in the organization is that we work on all sorts of issues related to waste. Either it's just optimizing waste management, so improving performance basically, or it's working on reduction, on waste prevention, on zero waste policies. And we do that with local governments, like it was mentioned. We do that sometimes at the national level, at the international level, especially the EU. We do that with companies, with other organizations, and of course, we also work at the individual level. Now, throughout the years, we've done many things. We actually started with enormous project before I mean, the team didn't even know each other yet, but we got this idea from Estonia that what if we tried to clean up the country in a single day? So we organized the biggest environmental event in our history. And I think by participation, it's still a world record, because every 7th person in the country volunteered that single day. And the good thing is, we gathered a lot of data to provide a start for future monitoring. And then due to public pressure, repeated it 2 years later with similar success. But the really great thing was that we didn't just, have just another cleanup, right? The impact was much wider in the sense of both awareness. Waste became a topic of public discourse, and people started to care in general about their communities more. It's not just about the environment. And the fact that even though roughly the same amount of people came in the second event, we gathered just a quarter of the waste. So it really went to show that, we have a lot of dump sites, a lot of litter in the countryside from times before we had proper waste management, before we had trucks, before we had bins everywhere, right? So it was just this past transgression in a sense that we helped solve. Anyway, later, of course, we focused on more interesting things, more related to current waste issues. So food waste was a major one. We worked with several institutions, helping them minimize it, working at the national level on awareness raising, working on gathering first national level data that we now monitor at the European level. We helped fix the, let's say, the agricultural law. So now food surplus redistribution from supermarkets and things like that is much more well defined. The supermarkets don't have to pay VAT twice, and there are calls for tenders each year for the people that usually do the redistribution. So these are typically humanitarian organizations, mostly volunteer-based, and this really helps them to, maintain their vehicles, maintain, and all the equipment needed to maintain hot and cold chains, so the food remains edible and safe to eat. But yes, food waste is just what I call sort of an entrance drug, because everyone cares about food at some level, so it's easy to understand and explain why it's a problem. But of course, plastics is also everywhere, whether you're talking about microplastics pollution that we monitor, or whether you're talking about the packaging problems and extended producer responsibility issues that we have, all this over-packaging, all these bad materials, all these problems later with treatment. We've done a lot in that area. More tuned to the individuals, again, are textiles. Of course, we've had some collection, and now it's mandatory for everyone from next year on, but it's mostly collection for reuse, right? So what the waste waste managers gather is waste textiles and waste clothes, but we have very little infrastructure for actually treating it in Slovenia. We don't have any measures against fast fashion. So throughout the years, we did a lot of awareness raising, trying to, let's say, not maybe halt, but to slow this trend of all these shitty clothes entering the market, and trying to remove the taboo of wearing secondhand clothing. There isn't one really within the family or within a close-knit circle of friends, but with strangers. That was quite a big deal when we started. So we hosted regular exchanges, and this is something that municipalities like to do themselves as well. It's a very simple thing to do, and it's easy to get volunteers for it, and people care and come. So very simple thing to do, and now it lives on its own. Basically, they're organized every month around the country. We don't have to bother anymore. And the other thing about reducing the waste footprint for individuals is just making it easier for them to live a less wasteful life. And this is also one of the focuses that municipalities have to think about, because it's not just policy measures. It's not just about building infrastructure. It's not just about the trucks and how you organize the logistics of collection. So what we do, we had a web shop for a while with some of the typical zero waste items since they weren't available on the market. But we're most proud of our Less is More platform, where we have maps and lists and filters and calendars of all the shops where you can buy things without or with less packaging, all the people that repair things, all the reuse shops, secondhand shops, all the water fountains and things like that, a bunch of other good practice examples, and a calendar of events that might be, again, clothes exchanges, might be food surplus exchanges, might be seed exchanges, might be something else related to prolongation of life, like repair cafes and stuff like that. So it's quite lively, and it's growing, and it's embodying this goal of, okay, all these good practices already exist, but if people don't know about them, the effect is minimal, right? So we try to be the glue, the connecting force that makes the discoverability of all these local gems much greater. So, you want to fix this or buy that, you have a one-stop shop where to look up this information and then get going. And also, of course, it's a way of supporting this younger economy that's trying to implement new business models that are more circular, and they're trying upcycling and repair and recombination and remanufacturing, that sort of stuff, because they're prominently featured in our map, and we also write articles now and then promoting new good practices. Another very typically Slovenian thing is that, Slovenia is tiny, right? But we have 212 municipalities, and some are big, like our biggest cities, but many are fragmented into oblivion and have even fewer than 1,000 people in them. And okay, well, what does that change with waste management? Well, we have about 60 waste managers managing the waste of these 200 municipalities. So because there's no standardization, this means that in each municipality there might be different bins, different bin colors, different icons, different labels, different instructions, what goes where, even if the bins are the same. So we provide this tiny, let's call it a web service, this website where you can just write, okay, I have this waste and I'm from this, or I'm in this municipality. And it will tell you, okay, it goes there. This is the typical way it's treated in the rest of the country. Because, for example, if you're curious how to deal with some waste and you're traveling or you're, commuting for work, the system might be different. And it might be odd to hear that some places don't want handkerchiefs in the bio-waste bin, right? And the statistics that we give, the response helps you understand, oh yeah, okay, it is typically accepted, but here apparently it's different, right? So again, it's about making it easier for the end user so they don't have excuses. So things in the end work out better. Anyway, getting to actual zero waste stuff. One of the things that we started with besides municipalities was working on tourism, because again, like in households, we create municipal solid waste there, right? So events, accommodation providers, caterings, everything, restaurants, bars, everything in this sort of space produces municipal solid waste, and is a great opportunity to optimize that, because every time we start, we see there's large inefficiencies involved. Separate collection is very bad if it happens at all. Tons and tons of waste is generated. So we work with companies and organizations that do these things and help them optimize management. And we've had several great results. We work with about 20 events by now. Many reach over 90% separate collection rates. We worked with several hotels. I mean, some reduce the amount of waste by 40% within half a year even. Sometimes it's very easy when, you just make it easy for them to understand, because it's about monitoring, it's about showing them, okay, but are you thinking about this? Is this really needed? etc., etc., etc. But we can talk about this a bit later, because today the focus is more on municipalities. Why is this important for municipalities? Because, of course, for our large touristic municipalities, the tourism sector is a large contribution to the overall waste statistics and waste performance. And events in general are important for municipalities because, on one side, many of the public events are organized by the municipality or one of their, let's say, subunits. But also events are where people come, have fun, and they're, again, a good opportunity or a good space where you can raise awareness about good management, good manners, zero waste, etc. And yes, cities. For us, it started in 2014. By now, we have even a certification at the European level, but we'll see that a bit later. And cities join for various reasons, and we have various results. The whole movement started in Italy over 15 years ago, so there's quite some tradition in this space. But why would they even care, right? Why do municipalities join us on this path to zero waste? Why? What's in it for them, right? Because, of course, I would argue at the simplest of levels, waste is a symptom of inefficiency. Whether you're talking about solid waste or gaseous waste or liquid waste, if you produce something that's unwanted beside your main output, of course it's an inefficiency. You spend time, energy dealing with it. I don't know, your machinery, it has to be replaced sooner, etc., etc. So it's an inefficiency, and that means that it's costing you money. So that's a simple way to understand for some people, because not everyone cares about the environment, right? So if you look at the environment side of things, globally, we're really bad at waste management still. Only a third of it is managed properly. So mostly it goes into unsanitary landfills. Of course, in Europe, we're much more advanced than that, but still, we have a large gap when it comes to development around the world. And yes, plastics is, again, quite emblematic. I think the study was from 2016 or 18 maybe, but basically they looked at all the plastics we produced since its invention and how it was treated, and the estimate was that only 9% of it has been recycled. The rest either is in nature, landfill, or was burnt, right? And again, in Europe, we're better at that. For packaging, we have official statistics. For harder plastic, not really, but still, there's quite a lot still to reach. That's why we also have the Single-Use Plastic Directive. That's why the new Packaging Directive, I guess, regulation now will give us more and more targets, stricter controls, and more pressure on producers to produce better products so we don't have problems with their waste. But yes, we are really bad at keeping our waste to ourselves, in a sense. I think this is a picture from the Himalayas. We put waste wherever we go, basically. From the deepest pits, we found plastic waste in the Mariana Trench, to the highest mountains, even, of course, microplastics, because it's basically dust. We found it in remote regions of the Antarctic where nobody has been before. So our footprints are everywhere, so to speak. And it's even worse than you might think, because we even have a problem with waste management in space by now. So, of course, this image is a schematic. It's not up to scale. But we have so many dead satellites, pieces of satellites, of rockets, of crashed units, of other debris, of weaponry in our orbits around the world, that we now have problems with launching new satellites, because there's a risk of hitting other parts. Even the International Space Station has to now and then make emergency maneuvers to get out of collision paths, basically, to not get destroyed. Because you might imagine, oh yeah, but a satellite, or a piece of metal, that's quite small. I mean, it is quite small, but you have to imagine that things here travel with speeds that are measured in kilometers per second, right? So even the smallest of things have an impact if you have a high difference in relative speed. So now we have a whole field of science and engineering working on satellites with nets or with robotic arms to try to start collecting some of this waste to reduce issues. And at the same time, we started launching microsatellites. So it's getting even more crowded. So clearly we have some things to do. And for those that care about the environment, this might be enough of a motivation. Some would argue that, well, we're in this climate crisis, but when I look at the contributions from various sectors, waste is such a minor part of it, right? You can see here, this is a really, really poor chart from the IPCC report. I mean, based on the IPCC report. And waste has a few percent of the pie. You can see how large the energy supply or agriculture industry is. And waste, well, what do we even count as waste? Well, that's where the trick lies, because for waste, first part is the wastewater treatment, because you can imagine how energy intensive it is to dry or treat the mud after it. But for waste, we actually also only count methane emissions from improper landfills. So in Europe, we've had a ban on landfilling unstabilized waste for a while anyway. And then there's also some incineration related emissions that are not counted under the industrial ones. Like co-incineration, I think, goes under industrial one. But what I'm trying to say is, for the waste sector in this distribution of greenhouse gas emissions, we only count a really small part. But if we think a bit harder about it, what is waste? Waste first had to be a product before it got wasted. And that product didn't just materialize from nowhere. For that product, we had to dig or grow the primary raw materials needed to create it. We had to manufacture it, we had to transport it around, a bunch of energy was used. So we can see that waste has a much larger footprint that's hidden in all these other parts of the chart. And in fact, one estimate from a recent study basically shows that over half of the emissions are related to our materials economy. So how we produce and how we consume things. So waste is quite a lot more impactful than you might think from just looking at this chart, right? Because it's driving all the other sectors as well. Now, at the individual level, of course, there are health effects. We know more and more about the risks of exposure to various chemicals that are in our products. We have this rich regulation at the European level. We're trying slowly to phase out certain problematic persistent organic pollutants and things like that. But in general, we can see more and more scientific consensus that, for example, the additives in plastics can be very problematic. Like, I'm sure you've heard of phthalates and bisphenol A and bisphenol S and stuff like that. And it's impacting our reproductive capabilities, it's impacting our hormonal systems, it's impacting our, let's say, risk of disease. And in some cases, again, not in Europe, waste is a public health hazard because, if you imagine an improper landfill, water gathers in small pockets. Just imagine some foil or some plastic bag, and that can be a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And that's one of the main reasons our colleagues in Southern Africa work on ways to try to reduce, the breeding grounds for malaria and dengue fever. So various other impacts of waste, of course, from the pollution aspect, from the devaluing of property, etc. But some municipalities wouldn't care about that either, right? They're in there for political reasons, for the ego boost maybe. But sooner or later, they'll have to face the fact that our consumption patterns are still driving things and accelerating, let's say, accelerating our decline in a sense, because our consumption and waste generation is increasing higher than the population rate. Our pressures on the earth, our natural resources, is increasing much faster than anything else. So you may have heard of the simple statistic that we now measure, how many earths would we need to sustain our current lifestyle? And for Slovenia, it's already over 2. Our overshoot day was in April last year, I think. So in the European context, have much to still do. And of course, the less developed part of the world are catching up, which they have every right to. But it would be silly to let them make all the mistakes that we did, because we are on a limited planet with limited resources, and we just can't continue with this exponential growth. I mentioned work on food waste. This is really frustrating to me because we still have over 500 million people in the world that are malnourished or starving, and at the same time, we throw globally away about 1/3 of all the food we produce. And even if we don't reduce all that food waste, of course it's impossible to reduce it to zero, but we can get much closer. We could feed several times the amount of people that currently are malnourished or starving. So it's just about better distribution, better use, more fair trade and pricing and all that sort of thing. And it's just absurd that we are somehow just okay with this. And in general, our waste generation is quite asymmetrically, let's put it that way, distributed around the world. More developed countries produce much more waste. And I think that's also why municipalities in Europe in general should feel a greater desire to do more, because it's also part of our global compassion and justice in a sense. And you might notice Mongolia there being an outlier. I think it's from the fact that they rely very heavily on imports of everything, and then they have a lot of waste that they can't treat. Anyway, this is what happens when we export our waste without proper management. It's still happening in Africa, Southeast Asia. People are burning electronics and things like that to get copper and other worthy metals out of it, to the great pain on their health and their land, their waters. And we still have a big problem of illegal waste trade and, let's say, the gray sector as well. And this is not something most municipalities deal with, but it is important for those that have ports, port authorities, because it's also quite a hard problem to manage. Imagine you have to inspect a shipping container full of computers or other electronic devices. If it's all nicely set up, how would you know if it is actually waste or if it is, as the statement on the container says, that it's, oh, this is for reuse, right? You don't have all the cables, you probably don't have all the needed knowledge, and imagine how much time it would take to review. So we still have some gaps in our Basel Convention and our policies at the European level, and unfortunately things like this are still happening. But at the same time, we are realizing that we are not a resource-rich continent, that we are lacking critical raw materials, and that we should just for our own sake, deal with our own waste at home. So we have more of this cadmium, more of this lithium, more of this other rare earth elements available for our own use, because it's a strategic disadvantage that we have to import this and then we export it back as waste, basically. Anyway, all these things might be motivating to some, but some people just don't care. And for them, I usually present the argument of economic benefits. Waste management is naturally a cost. Like we said, waste in general is an inefficiency, and the costs are just rising, not just from the requirements of higher and higher performance, but we have higher and higher standards on how to do things properly, whether you're considering environmental protection or, I don't know, workers' rights. The costs are in general increasing. And in that sense, if we produce less waste and if we manage it better, we can reduce our costs, right? So this is a quite famous chart from Contarina or Capanori, no? Which was the first city that implemented a zero waste strategy. It was in Italy. And you can see from the green chart how they slowly increased their share of separate collection and how they reduced the amount of residual waste. And this all helped them reduce the costs as well and keep them stable while they increased in the region. Now, an even better chart is this, because you might say, yeah, okay, Capanari, but that's, you know, a sample of one. What sort of study is that? This is from the whole region, I think, of Milan. And it's basically showing costs per person per year for households, sorry. And the green part is the cost of separate collection, and the blue part is the cost of residual waste collection, so of the mixed waste, the black beans, that sort of stuff. And you can see in the bottom you have percentages. So municipalities were grouped by their performance, so 20 to 30% up to over 70%. And naturally, you can see that to reach the highest level of separate collection, the costs for separate collection will increase. But at the same time, the treatment and the costs for residual waste will decrease, and because they're higher, the total price decreases. There's a small trend. So it makes economic sense just from this sort of data to do better. And in Italy, actually, they have really interesting systems in several regions. They, at the regional level, set targets that municipalities have to meet with regards to separate collection and I think also waste generation. And then they have a sort of a fund, and municipalities that meet the target pay, let's say, some basic rate. The municipalities that don't meet the target pay the basic rate and some penalties. And the municipalities that overshoot the targets actually get paid out of the fund as an award, in a sense. So everyone's motivated to keep improving, right? And it's the same in Ljubljana. It's maybe easier because it's a larger waste management company covering several municipalities. But if you compare their pricing for per household throughout the years, it's been stable. It's been much lower than in the second biggest city, for example. And this is something that we also see in other countries. Their costs are much more resilient to sudden shifts and changes and are usually lower than the national average. But, you know, you can, if you put the time into it, you can really show detailed costs analysis, whether that's for some specific municipality or some specific organization or a sector. It just requires more work, more valorization. But we've done something like that for a hospital, just on the food waste part and just on the edible part of food waste. So not bones and peels and stuff like that. And, you know, we measured the food waste for a full day. We were there weighing everything that went out of the kitchen per meal type, all that came back. So we knew how much rice they ate, how much of this, how much of that, etc., etc. So there was quite some interesting insights from that. But in the end, we could also put a price on it, besides just the price of the food that was wasted, because you had to buy it. That's the easy part. Then you had some electricity, some water, and ideally you could also quantify the staff time needed. But even just without that, we realized that basically with every meal that they serve, they throw €0.50 away. And on they have 300 beds. They're open throughout the year. You get astronomical costs immediately out of that. So it was quite motivating for the board to then start implementing measures to reduce the food waste. But it does require a detailed analysis, and then you get something useful out of it. It's good to repeat it, and this is the general zero waste way. You just start somewhere. It doesn't matter if you're a good performer or not. Start improving, you keep measuring, keep reevaluating, and just repeat this process ad nauseam. And food waste actually became such a big topic in Slovenia that also our court of auditors started to pay attention. So they audited schools if they managed their food well. And I think also they're considering auditing municipalities as well in general, because we have targets incoming at the national level, and of course national level targets never get met if they don't get met at the local level. And yes, at the European level, we're all talking about the circular economy, about redesigning products, eco-design, ensuring that we design waste out of the system in a sense. And of course, this is an ongoing process. In Slovenia, it's been, if I discount some good practices, I would say it has been mostly hot air. I'm not sure what your experience is, but at the national level, it's been such a slow process. We're still quite linear. We're still quite inefficient when you compare how much primary raw materials we use per person and how much material productivity we have, that sort of thing. But the concept, of course, of the circular economy is shared with zero waste. It's about minimizing this leakage, minimizing the waste that gets produced, and ensuring that the materials can circle and remain and retain their value for a long time. So that's why it's sometimes harder to grasp for the waste managers that we work for, because it's not just about improving the waste management itself. Once you have waste, you have a problem in a sense, and it's just up to us to try to minimize the problems that it causes, whether that's costs or pollution, everything else. And if we keep producing bad products, we'll continue to have bad waste, right? So it goes beyond that, and municipalities are the ones that can push producers to do better as well. It's not just the European level, it's not just the national level. And yes, with the circular economy packages, we get new targets, more legislative pressure to do better, more awareness raising in a sense. And that's also one reason that municipalities join our networks, because they realize this is coming. Even if we don't care, this is getting forced onto us. And to be honest, we never have to resort to legislation. Everyone's motivated usually from all the other reasons, but this is also a thing, right? And yeah, of course, there's a link with circular economy, zero waste, and the climate crisis. I've already explained that. And for Europe, it's a central strategy to tackle all these different problems that we have, not just improving the state of our environment, but also it's a way of job creation. This is another economic aspect, because if you imagine all this preparation for use, all this repairing, all these new business models, Many of them are quite manual, many of them are quite work intensive, hard to automate, hard to use robots for. And that's why Europe sees this also as a great generator of new green jobs, because we'll need all these extra people, all these extra skills to manage a really true circular economy. But yes, let's go to cities. And I realized, I talk about zero waste now for, I don't know, 20 minutes at least. And I haven't actually explained yet what it is. But I wonder, does anyone want to share what they think about zero waste, how they would define it? Anyone? Okay, I guess not. I'll move on. This is a picture from our regional waste management center of their compost heaps. So yes, zero waste. I think most people associate more the zero waste lifestyle aspect with zero waste, where it's all about, glass jars and stuff like that, and people gathering their mixed waste and saying, oh, you see, this is the only thing that I couldn't separate in a year. And of course, that's important. We all have to do our bit. But zero waste as a concept is broader. It's about more than that. It's about things that I talked about before, about this conservation of the value and the energy embodied in the material itself, and reducing the negative impacts of the production cycle and everything else that happens later, both on the environment, to human health, and the economy in a sense. We have a formal definition and all that, but in English they say it so nicely, so briefly, just 4 words. To oversimplify it, it's just no burn, no bury. We want zero waste. And of course, when you say zero waste, people get upset sometimes, especially the more engineering types, like, oh, zero, but that's impossible, they're crazy, we're always gonna create waste. And of course, we're always gonna create waste, but if you're not about zero waste, for how much waste are you? For 1 ton per person per year, for 2 tons, for 500 kilograms, for 100 kilograms, for less? So zero is this aspirational goal that we try to get as close to as possible. Think of it as an asymptote in mathematical terms. And like I said before, the zero waste process is a process. We call it a journey often. It doesn't matter where you start, but you're walking and trying to move closer and closer to zero. Now, if you start with really bad results, you can get really great results very fast. And of course, if you already have 92% separate collection rates, then increasing for another percent will be much harder than if you're starting with 40%. So it's this continuous process of optimization, of looking where you are, and we have several tools that help us with that. And just as a small example, what can be done at the level of towns. Of course, it's easier to optimize smaller towns, but Tremotola is a small town in Italy. We don't have such great results in Slovenia yet. We have one mountain, more of a village than town, with about 1,000 people that also reach over 90% separate collection rates. But the total waste amounts are still much better in Tremotola. So imagine a municipality where everyone on average is giving away basically all the waste separately. There's almost no mixed waste, see, 5-6%. So in the end, 10 kilograms of mixed waste per year, you might not have the data in your head to compare that to, but for example, In Slovenia, it's closer, the average, to 150 kilograms per year. We set targets that might be 60 or 80 or 100, depending on the city size. So, I mean, this is as close to zero as it gets, and it's already happening in several places around Europe. So it's not that zero is completely impossible and we shouldn't think about it. It's a great aspirational goal, and we can get very close to it. Another example would be maybe with communication, but I'll show it later. And yes, I mentioned that it all started in Italy, and we have the largest network of zero waste cities there as well. And it's not just Tramutola in the sense, right? Many show obviously awesome and inspiring results. We're quite lucky in Slovenia that we're close to Italy, and we have a great cluster nearby that we can visit and learn from. And there you have in Contarina region basically 500,000 people living in about 50 municipalities together, managed by one waste manager. And they also reach between 85 and 90% separate collection rates, have great programs and things like that. So great results are already possible today. This is not a strategy for the 20-year future. It is something everyone can start achieving now. And yes, in the European network, we do have, great examples like some in Italy, but it's not just a network of excellence for the best performance in Europe. We have, a few towns started in Croatia, or Salasea in Romania, El Boalo near Madrid, with abysmal levels of separate collection rates, right? But like I said before, if you start with poor results, you can improve really fast, and this has been proven to be the case every time we tried, basically. And just as a funny example, this El Boalo and Matelpino example in Spain, they had about just a few percent rate of separate collection, right? So basically nothing. And then the mayor changed, and the activists from Madrid came and pestered him again, right? And he said, okay, fine. We're doing so bad. Let's just go for the zero waste strategy. It can't get worse. So they implemented it and had again great results. Interesting measures because it's a more rural town. They had some municipal goats to eat the green parts of the garden waste. So even the mayor was helping cater to the goats. They had chickens, like a chicken coop installed into their school, so kids would learn to treat the food better and help take care of the chicken. And then they had families rotate in oversight of these chickens, and they would get paid in eggs. So, little small, nice, good few stories like that. And in the end, of course, they set up all the infrastructure needed for proper collection and awareness raising and all that. But these are some of the more interesting anecdotes. And yes, they achieved much better results quite fast. I didn't explicitly say it before, but in this network, in this line of work, we mostly work on municipal solid waste. So we don't focus on construction and demolition waste. We don't focus on hazardous waste or other industrial commercial wastes. Some municipalities might be interested in that because of their past, and they might have problems with typically hazardous waste or some production facilities, etc., etc. So we always focus on municipal solid waste because that means that the results that we get are comparable across the country, across Europe, but also this is what's linked to our all individual consumption in households, in offices and stuff like that. If we included industrial waste, then rural municipalities would always win out. So yes, the approach. I already mentioned that it's a continuous process of improvement, and we really strive to be transparent in this whole process with municipalities. From the start, through all the other work, because greenwashing is so ripe, there's so much of it in this space, and of course we are allergic to it. So we try to design our work in a way that preemptively avoids it. And so not just individuals can keep us and the municipalities accountable, but also others. And so it's easier also to learn from the examples given, and just to avoid empty words and let's say we would say it's like diluting the concept of zero waste, because it is a specific thing. It has a definition, it has a formal certification for cities now, and not just anyone can claim that their city is zero waste, because it has a very strict system behind it, what this actually means. And we do have to now and then, you know, put our fist down and say, no, actually, this is not it. You know, do your due diligence if you want to be called a zero waste municipality or city. Until then, you don't have a right. And parts of it are actually trademarked at the European level. And yes, transparency I mentioned, and in general, we try to measure all that we do. So for waste, it's generally easier because you weigh it, you can count sometimes things, but we also want to measure the social impacts. That's much harder. That's not always a quantitative thing. So there are some proxy measures and things like that, and we're still improving in this area, but hopefully we'll, you know, as the years progress, we'll be able to showcase the much wider impacts beyond just costs or the environment or the amounts of waste, or maybe job creation is also an easier one. And the main tool that we always use when in doubt is the waste hierarchy. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with it. We've had it in the European legislation, in the national legislations since at least 2004. And in the zero waste movement, we just tweak it a bit. We make it a bit stricter. So we make more of the ways of treatment unacceptable, right? We want to preserve more of the value in the materials, and we expand the space of waste prevention, the most important part of the hierarchy. Now, of course, before we had just waste prevention, then you had prevention for use, and that's already, you're dealing with waste already there. So this is the middle part. But the biggest impacts we can have if we work on the top part in the prevention itself. So before things reach the waste manager, because reuse is not of waste by definition, it still has to be, it must not have a waste status, let's put it that way. It's still an item. So that's a simple thing. I mentioned exchanges. You can have public workshops where people can rent or just borrow tools and stuff like that. Reducing a simple measure, you know, sometimes you can achieve the same result by producing less of the waste or using less of the input material, things like that. Quite straightforward. But then we get to the more complicated parts where I think the most interesting examples are the rethinking and redesigning phase, where you're changing the product itself, you know, how to design this packaging or the product itself so there'll be less waste, or that the product will be easier to repair, or it will be easier to disassemble, easier to recycle, that will have less toxic components or materials, that it will, I don't know, be faster to process later, etc., etc. And this is something that actually municipalities do have an influence on. And I'll give an example again from Italy, since they started earlier. And I'm sure you know Italians like their coffee. And one of the municipalities realized, when we look at our mixed bin, our mixed waste, we have all these coffee capsules inside. And you can imagine a coffee capsule. It's a bit of plastic packaging, and then it's crammed with coffee. And of course, nobody will separate that at home and scoop out the coffee into the by-waste bin and then put the dirty packaging into packaging or plastic or however they collect it. So they realized, yeah, we have a large share and we want to still reduce it. We're on our journey to zero waste, and it's not changing throughout the years. So they wrote to the producers. They have several in Italy, and to everyone's positive surprise, the producers responded, because they wrote to them, okay, we have this problem because of you, help us solve it. So the producers came up with several solutions. So one decided to implement sort of a reverse logistics system where people would actually give back the capsules once they were emptied. And of course, that's quite an expensive way to manage things. One other designed the capsules out of certifiably industrially compostable plastics. So you can chuck everything into the bio-waste bin and it will be properly composted later without any emissions of microplastics, so to speak. And the one actually really had an innovation where they added something else that's appropriate for human consumption into the mix and changed the way they compress the coffee into the capsule. So in the end, it stuck together without the need for an outside shell. So it was just coffee basically, and it just went into the bio-waste bin. And of course, when they repeated their analysis years later, they saw the share of these single-use coffee capsules decrease. And the other part is rethinking. And it's not just about redesigning products, it can be about redesigning processes, right? And this is an example from Slovenia. We have a kindergarten in Vrhnika where they realized, oh, we get so much of this technically hazardous waste just from sunscreen, sunblock for protection from the sun, because it comes in small packaging and kids play outside, we need it. Then some parents insist that their kids should have their own, and there's all this packaging and it's just piling up and piling up, and they're sensitive to hazardous waste in general because they have a plant that deals with a lot of the hazardous waste in the country, in the same municipality, and it burned down a few years back. So quite important for them to be mindful of it. And they realized, okay, well, we could try to get sunscreen in bulk somehow, or we can try something else. And what they did was they rethink the process. So what they did was, first, they changed the schedules when the children are allowed to play outside. So they're not out there in the middle of summer in, I don't know, at noon or at 1 when the sun is the strongest. They planted some trees to increase the shade cover of the outside area. And, if it is the warmer part of the year, they also have kids just wear long sleeves. So they designed the need for sunscreen out of the process, basically. So now they don't have that waste at all. So I think it's a really, really great example. And this is coming from one kindergarten. It wasn't a think tank or some giant corporation that thought about it. No, it was simple initiative from a kindergarten. Brilliant. And yes, we can see the waste hierarchy also when we're thinking about the climate impacts, because comparing prevention where you're extending the lifetime of products or removing the need for creation of new products has much bigger, let's say, savings of emissions than just recycling them or repairing them. And of course, treatment usually is net positive in the sense that we are creating emissions. And as I mentioned, circular economy is a job creation tool as well. And you can see why. You can see again the hierarchy in this. If you focus on prevention, the type of work needed for that is much more different and has much greater potential for green job creation than, let's say, landfilling or incineration, where it's quite a mechanical process, so to speak. So yes, for a few years now, at the European level, there's now the Zero City certification that codifies the whole process of municipalities joining, what it means to be a zero waste city. So it's in a sense also a checklist of what performance you should reach, what measures you should or can do. And it's quite strict in a sense. You can reach several stars, some optional criteria, and some mandatory, of course. And this network is also growing because at the European level, we're slowly transitioning everyone to this consistent level that's better, that's comparable across the continent, but also this is now compatible with the Greens Claim Directive that is coming to further prevent greenwashing and other consumer protection stuff, because I'm sure you've seen a bunch of products with various icons and labels on them that you have no idea what they mean, but they all claim they're green and I don't know, plastic free or biodegradable, etc., etc. So at the European level, we're tackling this confusion, and we're quite lucky that we started this certification in time. It wasn't started because of this reason, but now we are ready basically for the upcoming changes, and it will be only easier to become a zero waste city because you have all this framework, mentors, auditing involved, and it's a third-party auditor, which is another requirement by the new legislation. You can't just say, oh yeah, I'm green, and then everyone will believe you. Someone else has to verify it. There has to be a system in place. And again, we have several levels. Cities usually start with the candidate phase, where it means that you have time to think about preparing a strategy, setting goals, setting up an advisory board, and then in a few years' time, you get your first proper external audit when they're checking the first, let's say, the first impacts that you've achieved. What's the performance levels, what measures you put in place, what sort of targets you have, what sort of process you led in the creation of all this, because we do quite put an emphasis on it being a co-creative process of becoming a zero waste city, because it's so easy to just write a strategy, right? And then if it's not implemented, it's just dead letters on a paper, right? So we ensure throughout the process that it's transparent, that people get involved, that the community grows around it and has a shared ownership, so to speak. And when we look at what typically zero waste cities implement, we always see some patterns, because some of the measures, they're different from city to city. That's obviously natural, and that's fine. Many measures are small and might seem not important, but they add up. But when you look at the bigger picture and what are the bigger strokes that everyone does, well, these are listed on the slide. So improving collection. So fewer eco islands, more door-to-door collection, so it's easier for people to give away waste. You don't have to, of course, collect all the waste door-to-door. Typically, glass isn't, for example, because it's heavy. And then pay-as-you-throw systems to incentivize people to manage their waste better and to produce less of it. So this is a whole family of different approaches on how to set the prices for municipal waste management, where you're trying to stimulate people that if they will need less bins, or if you're weighing the bins, if they produce less waste, they will pay less. And if they separate waste better, they will pay less than if they put it all in the residuals. Because of course you as a municipality or as a waste manager have higher costs if it's all ending up in the residuals. In Slovenia, we're quite lucky because both of these have been pretty much mandatory for about 13 years now. So we have a light system that's based on frequency of collection and the amount of bins and their volume. It's not very advanced and sometimes not very stimulative, but it's better than nothing. And you can see the results if you reduce the amounts so much that you don't need one bin anymore, for example. And then biowaste management, of course, from this year on, this is mandatory across Europe. In Slovenia, we started in 2011 already. So we've had all the infrastructure in place. It's second nature. And this is really crucial if you want good results, because biowaste can comprise up to half of all the municipal waste generated. So it's not just that, but also biowaste is why people have a negative attitude to waste, because this is what gives the bad smell. This is what pollutes other streams and reduces the efficiency of their recycling. And of course, you also miss out on all the good compost that you can get out of it. Then the composition analysis. This might become mandatory now for textile waste at the European level with the Waste Framework Directive revision coming. But in general, it's about looking at waste streams in greater detail. In Slovenia, we do every year, now for a few years, every municipality has to do at least one sample, depending on their size, and do a composition analysis by a certified lab of the mixed waste stream. So we have, I think, 23 categories that waste is recategorized into. And then you can see, okay, we still have a lot of biowaste inside. We maybe need to improve our awareness raising, or maybe we have a higher share of, I don't know, home composters, and they should maybe have little bins for kitchen waste as well, because they know they shouldn't, I don't know, compost bones or meat because of the rats, etc., etc. Or you might see, okay, wow, there's a large share of paper inside. Are we missing some bins, or is it just an awareness information thing? Why is so much paper here? We've been collecting paper separately for, I don't know, 30 years. And, some of it, of course, you will always find inside, and that's fine. Also, the lower the amount you have, the higher the share will be. But what's more interesting is that it allows you to see things like the coffee capsules, because once you do the composition analysis, you see what waste we just don't think about, what waste we don't care about, what waste we don't have extended producer responsibility covering the costs, we don't have systems for it. And typically what comes out is nappies, which is again a composite nightmare. You have some textiles, plastics, of course, some bio waste, so to speak, and it's heavy, it's mixed. And, if you don't do the analysis, you might never think about that. And then municipalities start implementing measures like maybe co-financing people that want to buy reusable nappies, or maybe granting some to families with new children, or maybe helping start a washing service locally, etc., etc. All these different options, again, that can help you reduce the amount of mixed waste quite significantly. Then, of course, various prevention measures. I already mentioned the fact that it shouldn't be all on the waste manager, because they don't have all the authority needed, but also, again, it should be the wider community contributing. So it's the municipality itself that can amend, let's say, the regulation on public events or public use of public spaces and stuff like that, where they can mandate, the waste should be separated there, or I don't know, you need to notify this and this district or person or whatever, have these measures in place. Or I don't know, if it's a thing about granting funding for events, you can have extra points in the criteria or minimal standards that are higher related to waste management, etc., etc. because communication is another really key measure. Again, it's not so second nature to us engineers because this is a soft thing. But if people don't know that the infrastructure exists, they won't use it, or why they should use it, and how. It's always underused, underperforming. And just as an illustration, oh, not yet, sorry. While I mentioned door-to-door and pay-as-you-throw, on this chart you can just see two clusters from Italy, and the red one immediately implemented both a door-to-door system and pay-as-you-throw, but the green one only implemented pay-as-you-throw in 2007. And once both did the same, green caught up, but just door-to-door collection wasn't enough to be as performant as the other. We have a great study also from Spain, from Catalonia, where they just show that door-to-door collection has great results, both in terms of higher capture rates of clean quantities, but also actually the quality or the cleanliness, the amount of impurities involved are much lower when you use door-to-door collection. Pay-as-you-throw, typically it's not done specifically like in Slovenia, but you have a fixed fee that covers all the basic costs needed and is also a deterrent for people to throw the waste in nature or to the neighbor, right? And then you have a part that's variable, that's there to incite people to perform better. I think this example is from Parma. Yes, in Slovenia, I mean, Ljubljana is famous for its underground bins in the city center because it was really important, as a tourist attraction to reduce, let's say, the visual impact of waste. So these are large and very expensive containers, but also they are open. So for the packaging, for glass, for paper, anyone can still drop things in, even tourists. They can separate the waste. It's just the buy waste bin and the mixed waste bin that are locked, and you need a special key card. So it's all accounted directly as you deposit waste. But in general, I think our system is probably quite similar to how you do it in Poland. Ljubljana is not much different than the rest of the country. Maybe another example, how composting is cheaper than treating residual waste with bio-waste in it, whether that's for incineration or for stabilization before landfilling. And in Pontevedra, I think it's in Galicia, this city in Spain, they did a detailed analysis. And they basically saw that just encouraging home composting and community composting can reduce their costs for this waste stream tremendously. And in some regions of Spain, in the Basque Country in particular, I think you can get up to a 40% reduction on your waste management bill if you home compost, because the amounts are just so big and it makes sense for the waste manager to incentivize people that way. With door-to-door collection comes the fact that you can reduce the frequency of collection, which is good for noise levels and stuff like that. But again, it's also important to make things obvious for people so they know they can rely on collection and stuff like that. So we have websites where you can check your schedules for your address and things like that. And we get to composition analysis that I already mentioned. At the national level, we still have quite a large share of bio-waste inside. We have a target in our national waste management plan that's surprising even to us as zero wasters, because it's almost zero basically in, I don't know, in 10 years. And the country hasn't really done much in that space in general. So we'll see what happens. But I can't really overstate the importance of this composition analysis because they really give you a snapshot of what's going well, where future things that could be tackled. And it's also great communication material because you can really make nice photos, videos out of it, and it's a great way to monitor progress in your iterative journey towards zero. Now, we already talked a bit about prevention measures. Some cities here really like to hold certain events that are catering to that, because they have a tourism board and it's quite easy to have a regular event, or they just attach it to something else. And it might have been just a dance before, but then if it's preceded by a clothes exchange, or maybe even you invite seamstress to the clothes exchange so people can get help with patching a few little things or repairing a zipper and things like that. It's quite easy to upgrade sometimes. And in Slovenia, we're really happy with our water quality. We have very good drinking water almost everywhere. It's the exception if that's not the case. So we have a growing network of public fountains, and even the Waste Manager Guild basically has their own ongoing campaign about promoting the drinking of water from the tap, because it's absurd if you think about that we still sell bottled water. It might come handy when in some sort of crisis, but the water footprint alone of a water bottle is much higher than the water inside. So it's several liters just to produce the plastics that packages it. So it's crazy. And of course the water quality is worse. It's everyone's pet peeve, I would say, in Slovenia. And again, sure, part of the problem is tourists, but one local municipality is thinking about banning in their municipality the sale of water bottles. Juice is fine, but water bottles, like, why? Right? So some are really, let's say, innovative in their approaches. And we have an example from Austria where they added their own local tax for single-use plastics products. So it's not a German level Austrian level thing, but so far it works. They were sued by a company, but I think they won in the court. And it's another way to not just incentivize people to perform better, but you do get some funding out of it, which you can then use, I don't know, to organize events, to maybe finance communications campaign, etc., etc. And when we're constructing these strategies, we tend to involve also the more important local businesses, because sometimes it's a large source of employment for the local community, or it's central in some other aspect. And if they're that big part of the community, it's important that they have their own say in things, and that they also help in making it happen. So sometimes it might be, I don't know, the tourism sector, sometimes might be something completely random, but they are part of the local space, of the local community, and we need to think about that as well. And it's not about optimizing their little, I don't know, processing performance, but again, they have their own offices where people work, where you're generating municipal solid waste. They have their own channels where they can inform, raise awareness, educate, etc., etc. So on the prevention side, this is an open field of possibilities with new things to try and test and play with all the time. But I'll share some examples. a bit later. And just to drive the point how communication is important, in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Austria, everywhere where they tried this concept of zero waste family challenges, they've had amazing results. It typically goes this way, that you pick a smaller part of a city, or you have an open call for families, for households to join your program, and in exchange for that, they get a decrease in their waste management fee that they have to pay, and they get some basic tools and some training on how to shop better, consume better, how to manage the waste better. And in this case, in Kapari, I mean, the participants, of course, this is not the municipal average, reached even fewer kilograms per year than we have seen for Tremutola. So less than 5 kilograms of mixed waste per year, which is just bonkers. Of course, you can't convince everyone, it's a Gauss curve and all that, but it just goes to show how targeted communication can get you really far. And if you apply that every year to different households, you can slowly convert even the disbelievers. But yes, in practice, how does the process of becoming a zero waste city look like? This is a picture from Kran, where we had, we wrote the strategy, but there is also a phase where it was in public discourse. So people could comment and suggest changes and extra measures, things like that. And part of it was also that it was publicly displayed like this, printed out, so people could, find it and see it without having to be in a certain mailing list or stumbling on it on the website. And yeah, so by now you've heard many examples from outside Slovenia as well. At the European level, we have a network of not just cities, but organizations like ours that work on the zero waste topic. We're in this network, Zero Waste Europe. In Poland, we also have an association. And recently they organized a training actually for city officials, for ambassadors and all that. And I think it will be repeated again. But best to contact Zero Waste Poland. So it's important that we have both these networks, because it means that we can share good practices, we can share our bad results as well, we can share our problems, we can jointly advocate for better solutions, jointly press on producers to stop giving us bad products and stuff like that. And it all started in Italy, so the largest amount is there. We have a strong network in Spain, especially Catalonia, the Basque Country. Germany is quite interesting. We have Kiel in the top already being certified. Then we have large cities like Munich, Cologne, doing the German approach to things, and they've been planning for over 2 years now, writing strategies and all that. And it's taking ages. We have Barcelona working on a strategy for a few years now. We have Brussels as a region, not as a city, working on their strategy. So we have these examples from the smallest of villages to the biggest of towns. We have Riga in Latvia as another capital in the process of joining. So it's popping out everywhere. We had some good results in Ukraine even before the war started. Now it's a bit on a hold, but the activists, they are still working on things, because of course not all country is under immediate threat, but also where it is, you have many more issues with construction waste and things like that. And there's, of course, a greater need to maximize food surplus redistribution, things like that. So not only great examples forever, but also it's an opportunity to connect with others, to share experiences, to go and learn. This is how we got started, basically, because we could show in Italy how it's working well. This is how Croatia got started, because, okay, Croatians, part of Croatia would understand Italy, but the rest, like Italians, they're completely different, right? But Slovenians, if the Slovenians can do it, why not Croatians? So that's how the network in Croatia got started. So it was slowly spreading throughout Europe. And in some places it's harder than in others. We don't have any cities certified in France, for example, because their waste management is done at the regional level and they don't have full autonomy to do it themselves. But we have other great examples from there. Cities doing good things without being able to have a proper formal strategy. And I already mentioned that it's not just a network for the best, but we currently do hold more ambitious, let's say, municipalities, and that shows that in the results that we are better than the European average, but nothing that interesting. So the way this can start is that you can contact directly this Mission Zero Academy organization. This is the international certifier, and they can assign a local mentor and then later an auditor. For example, I audited the German city because we didn't have anyone trained yet there. And you can start on your process. It doesn't have to be very complicated. And the mentor is there to support you in the process anyway, to simplify things as needed. And it's not a certification like EMAS or, I don't know, ISO that's very complicated to understand, very bureaucratic. It's quite, I think it's quite manageable. It does require a certain level of performance in the end, especially if you want to achieve several stars, but it was designed with this in mind, to keep it understandable, to keep it manageable, to keep it devoid of unneeded detail or unneeded complications as much as necessary. Or you can just contact the organization that caters to zero waste nationally. In the case of Poland, that would be Zero Waste Poland. Or you might not even care about the formal certification. If you want to implement zero waste measures, please, you can ignore everyone, just do it. It will benefit you. If you want to learn more, I really recommend this website, zerowastecities.eu, because it has everything there. You have all these case studies from different cities. You have all these webinars and other sort of studies and materials, and they might be on the level of policy. So it might be some really technical policy details. It might be on the level of technology. So really details about compost plant operation or something, or it might be more on the, let's say, political level, in the sense of understanding or the broader picture, things like the Zero Waste Master Plan. And, you know, there are study tours organized now and then. We host, I guess, on average, at least one in Slovenia every year. And there's a lot to learn from there. There's a lot of resources. There's too much. Basically, there are some tools. Even we prepared a calculator so you can estimate the cost benefits of improved performance. So if you remember one thing from today, this would be a good slide to remember. Yeah, I mentioned the master plan, calculator. It's a simple way to compare results to some of our model cities that are already doing well, but you can use it to compare to yourself as well if you just use different data, basically, because it's all configurable. By default, you don't have to insert more than your city size in a range and your country if you want GDP adjustments, but it's very simple. So if you want really detailed, of course, you can put in your national details and your national costs, and it will use that. Otherwise, it will compare with the defaults for the whole European Union. So it might be different. In Slovenia, we have only a few municipalities in our network, less than 20, so less than 10%. But because we have the biggest and third biggest city on board, this means that we already cover almost a quarter of the population. And through this work of increasing separation rates, of preventing waste, going against the tide of increasing waste amounts, they managed to save quite a lot of money through the years. And, you know, they joined for several reasons, and some are more focused on the environmental thing. Some are more, for example, Ljubljana was really focused on this. I think I have a picture, I don't, because they wanted to win the Green Capital of Europe award. And they almost forced us to allow them to be among the first to join our network, besides the other 3 municipalities, so they could also put this into their application. And it worked. It was one of the things that helped them win in 2016. And the network is slowly spreading. And this is just the way we like it. We don't actually approach municipalities to join us. We let them come to us, because then we know that they're interested. It's not that we manage to convince 1 or 2 people that are in power and then nothing will happen. But if they have the will, we are there to support, to help them however they want, how much they want, and we make it happen. And then, of course, there's yearly reporting involved, and we draw charts with the data, and all the reports and all the meeting notes are available on our website. And everyone's slowly making progress. Some municipalities are more ambitious than others, some are more performant than others. We don't really mind. It's all about long-term journey of improvement. And last year, we're quite lucky. At the national level, we had for the first time a decrease in the amount of municipal solid waste since the economic crisis in 2013, while at the same time we had economic growth. So this decoupling is the holy grail in this space, and it was really great. And this is just an impressive result from Ljubljana. It's the best performing capital in Europe when it comes to waste management, over 70% separate collection rates today. And you can see the large share of the brown bar, that's the bio-waste. And once we started collecting it and enabling people to give it away easily, you can see how quickly it skyrocketed and how it dominates. Yes, this was how it started. So what were some of the things that enabled our success to be faster and easier? Of course, I mentioned the Italian example. We do now and then have some good national level policy. Typically we're dissatisfied with it, but sometimes things are just working well. And in combination with the fact that we screwed up some of our regional funding from the European Union for the regional waste management centers, for the next 7-year annual period, the government just said, okay, there will be no money for waste infrastructure. We're sick of you. You're incompetent. You're mismanaging everything. No money. And this was at the same time that we had to close a lot of landfill capacity. We have almost no incineration and co-incineration. So we had basically maybe not dwindling, but a decreasing amount of disposal capacity. Waste amounts were still increasing, and there was no funding for new infrastructure. So you have no other choice but to work within the system that you have. So this is what we did. We optimized, we learned to raise awareness better, we learned to educate better, we learned to share information better, we optimize logistics, etc., etc., etc. In the end, we managed to increase our results, because if you look at Slovenia 10, 20 years ago, we were closer to the right side of this chart where countries are mostly landfilling their waste. And nowadays, we're among the top 3 in Europe when it comes to recycling of municipal solid waste. So we're not in danger of not meeting the 65% recycling target that we have. This is the green bar across. So every country from the top to the bottom basically should reach this green bar. And this flexibility really saved us in a sense, because we could have built large incinerators and stuff like that. There were plans that were shut down, etc. But already now we have less waste than back then, and we would have problems with, typically municipalities then have to pay penalties to the incinerator if they don't bring them enough waste, or they would be so disincentivized to reduce the amount of waste that we would have problems reaching the targets. So the Nordic countries have quite a big problem in that regard, because they're very reliant on incineration. And for example, Denmark already decided they have to close about 7 of their incinerators just to be able to increase the amount of recycling they do. So we're quite lucky. And if you're wondering about the no data gaps, these are for just, I mean, it's bizarre how the monitoring was set up at the European level, but this is basically from process emissions, process losses, basically, if you can imagine water vapor, stuff like that. And then in Slovenia also, waste can take up to 3 years to be treated. And what we have to report to Eurostat is basically all the waste that was generated in a year and all the waste that was treated in a year. So of this 17%, you know, at least half of it was also recycled as well, just in later years. So it's bizarre that we don't fix this data backwards in later years. It's always like this. So it just makes comparing the achievement of targets harder. So it's bizarre. But yes, I also talked a bit about infrastructure already, how it's not the business, and it's maybe the default, like with roads, and you know, let's just put concrete everywhere. But by itself, it's never enough. You can never fully utilize it without focusing on also the soft measures. It's just an enabling factor, but it can't get you the whole distance. And yes, being zero waste is about being curious, always looking for new areas of improvement. That's why the composition analysis, that's why it's all the continuous data gathering is important for new ideas, for connecting with others. For some things, you know, a municipality is just too small to implement, and they can influence the national government or the regional one, or they can connect with neighboring municipalities to start a joint venture, etc. But yes, for us, the process is that we help them write a strategy. There's a zero waste board, sort of an advisory board that's created to provide oversight, provide ideas, and to continue encouraging the shared ownership. We organize study tours. It has to be adopted by the whole local council, not just by the mayor, so it's less dependent on the current politics. And you know, depending on their wishes and their needs, it can take half a year, it can take longer, but we don't complicate usually. It's with the certification, there are a few extra layers involved, but as I said, we're here to make it simpler for them, to dose them little bits and pieces as they need to work on them, and then it just flies off. And you might think, oh, but it's a lot of work, we don't have an extra department for this or extra people working on this. A lot of these cases are actually just cities working without employing new people, because they just tweak a bit how the waste management works, or how their whoever covers the environmental bits at the municipal level works. You know, it's about maybe new policies here and there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have funding for a whole new department like in Kiel, or that you do crazy expensive investments. It's always an option, of course, and for some of these things you even get extra points in the certification, but there's no need for that at all. It's a low-cost entry, let's say. This picture is from Vrhnica, which is one of our best performing municipalities, and what I really like is their educational part, because, you know, having workshop in schools and kindergarten is just so trivial. Everyone thinks about that, but it's about the consistency. Here, if you live in Vrhnica, you'll meet the waste managers at least 3 times in your life. In kindergarten, in primary school, and in secondary school. So there's all this continuity, and everyone gets primed for better management, let's say, when they will have to manage their own waste eventually. And we had, you know, several interesting initiatives, some from Ljubljana, trying to reduce the amount of normal plastic bags in the market. So they encourage use of verifiably compostable, let's put it that way, bags, or they work with their events to reduce the amount of waste. We had these machines where you could refill your several different things. Typically it's for cleaning supplies and some oils, things like that. Some sharing app for high-end clothing, which you would just borrow basically. Everyone likes to work on public water fountains. So some municipalities developed their own app to show it better. And it's all these little things. How we set targets? Well, luckily, again, we have great data from Italy, because Italy is also very transparent about their achievements. And then Legambiente is doing great work highlighting some of the best performers. So we typically look at a city and then we say, okay, what do we have in our network or maybe in Italy that has a similar size but has better performance already today? So then we typically find something that's slightly bigger, has and is comparable. Let's say, is it very rural or not, that sort of thing. And if they already are reaching these results a few hundred kilometers away from us, this is an easy, good starting point for our targets. We know where we are, and we know we can reach at least this level. So we can have really smart targets in a sense, because it's already being done. We can do at least this well, if not better. I mentioned the kindergarten. They also started a reusable nappy scheme, where basically kids in the kindergarten are using the nappies, and this way they save 5 to 10K of euros per year, because they just don't have to buy all these single-use diapers. And it's been going on since, I think, 2013, and they still use the same diapers. They haven't destroyed them yet, right? And they don't have higher costs for water use. They don't need extra washing machines. It's much less hassle than it might appear. The large hassle is actually for the workers themselves, because it takes slightly more time to redress the kid when he needs a diaper change. But yeah, this was one measure that reduced the amount of nappies in the residual waste. Of course, we have interesting examples of communication as well. Larger cities, larger waste managements have bigger budgets for this and can do really proper campaigns and proper brochures and things like that. But we can also see in smaller ones that they're thinking, okay, who is actually problematic? We should focus also on tourism, and they have a lot of translated materials. Or in some municipalities, there are larger shares of immigrants from Albania or someplace else, and you need basically materials in their language if you want them to comply. Yeah, these are some examples of stickers on trucks, on besides the roads and stuff like that. Also, one of the hotels. Oh, I actually have a better picture. So Bled is one municipality that tries to encourage you to behave better even before you get there. And it's quite a challenge, because they get so many tourists that even in December, which is the least frequent month of the year, there's more tourists there than the locals. So it's high pressure for them, but they have some good results. Reuse centers, super popular. Cities start them all the time. If they don't have a social enterprise started, some waste managers start them themselves. But basically the concept is not everything that's wasted is actually waste. Maybe it just needs a bit of cleaning, maybe it needs a bit of touch-up, maybe it just needs a bit of repair. And people gladly bring things that they still think hold value to these places and give it away for free. Then some person manages it, and it's sold typically quite cheaply. But also you get some gems now and then, some really rare ceramics or some really rare radio sets and things like that people value. And all this retro fashion is in fashion, and people are actually willing to pay quite a lot for some of these things that you would typically consider old garbage. Yes, we also have some recyclers for Tetra Pak, and then Tetra Pak is out of three materials. So they create toilet paper and napkins out of the paper bit. From the plastic bit, they create the dispensers for soap and for the paper sheets, and the metal is easily recycled for anything else. Compliance is also a very important topic, of course, because if you just provide carrots and no stick, people won't do what is needed. So now and then they have inspection rounds, and this was an example where we gathered together the police, us, the mayor, the inspectorate, the national media, and we just went house to house checking the bins. And then sometimes you find a bill that shouldn't be there, and oh yeah, it's that house. And then Saturday in the morning you get a knock on the house from both the police and the inspector, the municipal inspector. I imagine that's not a pleasant surprise. Pay as you throw, as already mentioned, we have quite a detailed system on how this is done. But I don't think I need to explain very much the details. Study tours from Portugal, from rest of Europe, happening all the time. We also like to take our municipalities elsewhere, because it's a nice way to break the barriers and show how it's possible, and break some, let's say, congealed minds in a way. Some municipalities are also ahead in the sense that we don't have a deposit return system yet, and they started their own little collection schemes before, or they're collecting differently the by-waste. So typically by-waste and garden waste is collected together, but some collect it separately, which is much more performant. And then, of course, some are already collecting oils and things like that, have other incentives in place. But I mean, I see we're running out of time, so I'll just stop with my blabbering. Yeah, like I mentioned, we had good starting conditions, great inspiration. We had this bizarre thing with funding. We have maybe higher awareness raising, or higher awareness than the rest, and also our own work of our association worked with that, helped with that. And all this continuous pressure from the European level to get higher and higher results, and just the fact that we've done it for longer, and that we're not alone in this journey, helped us achieve success in a sense. This year it will be the 10th anniversary of our network, and we'll have a big celebration. But yes, we don't have time, and you haven't really shown interest for a workshop, so I'll just stop here, and we can have any questions if any popped up at all. I covered so many different things, so I imagine it can be quite overwhelming. But if there's anything you don't agree with, that's especially something I would like to hear about. If I don't know, if you have some interesting example to share, also happy to hear it.
I can't hear anybody.
Well, then we can leave everyone to grab some lunch and have a great day.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending this event, and great thanks for Jaka for conducting the webinar. I think there was many interesting examples which can be implemented at our local Polish level in Wielkopolska region. This webinar was recorded, and the record will be available on the project website with an option of translation into Polish. So I really encourage you to share this information with your colleagues from offices, because maybe they will be interested in this topic now or in the future. So thank you again, and finally, maybe please, Jaka, stay online for a while. Maybe we can talk for a moment, and thank you for attending.